I walked out of that office a failure, my startup dead and my dreams in ashes. Then, through a rain-streaked window, I saw my best friend shaking hands with the man who killed it all, and suddenly, failure became a blueprint for vengeance. The leather of the chair was cold, so cold it felt like it was actively sucking the warmth out of my body. It was a deliberate choice. I was sure of it. Everything in Arthur Vance's office was deliberate. From the ridiculously oversized mahogany desk that served as a barrier between him and the world to the single obscenely expensive painting on the wall that depicted a shipwreck. It was a not-so-subtle message to every hopeful founder who sat where I was sitting. Most of you will sink. My hands were clammy, and I discreetly wiped them on my slacks. I'd rehearsed this pitch 100 times. I knew my numbers, my projections, my market analysis. I knew the technology inside and out because I hadn't just designed it. I had bled for it. Nexus AI wasn't just a startup. It was the culmination of 3 years of sleepless nights, ramen noodle dinners, and a level of caffeine consumption that would probably qualify as a chemical dependency. It was a predictive logistics algorithm that could revolutionize global supply chains, saving companies billions and preventing the kind of shortages we'd all become too familiar with. It was brilliant. It was necessary. And Arthur Vance was my last hope. He hadn't looked at me for the last 10 minutes. His eyes, the color of faded money, were fixed on the tablet in front of him, swiping through my deck with a bored, almost disdainful slowness. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the soft thump of his thumb against the glass screen and the frantic, pathetic pounding of my own heart. My co-founder, Liam, sat beside me, rigid as a statue. He was the technical genius, the quiet one. I was the showman, the one who was supposed to charm the snakes. Right now, I felt less like a charmer, and more like the mouse the snake was calmly sizing up before the final squeeze. Finally, Vance set the tablet down. He folded his hands, his gold cufflinks glinting in the soft light from the panoramic window overlooking the city. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, and a slow, pitying smile spread across his thin lips. It didn't reach his eyes. "Son," he began, and the condescension in that single word was a physical blow. "I see 100 pitches like this a month. Bright-eyed kids with a revolutionary algorithm that's going to change the world." He leaned back, the expensive chair groaning in protest. "You have a good idea, a cute idea even, but it's a digital daydream. You're building a fantastically complex solution for a problem that the big players have already solved with brute force and deep pockets. They don't need elegance. They need reliability." My mouth went dry. "But that's the point, Mr. Vance," I managed to say, my voice sounding thin and reedy. "Our system is more than reliable. It's predictive. It anticipates problems before they happen. It's a paradigm shift, not an incremental improvement. The efficiency gains are a rounding error for these corporations." He cut me off, waving a dismissive hand. "What you have here," he tapped the tablet, "is a beautifully engineered money pit. Your burn rate is unsustainable. Your path to profitability is a fantasy novel, and you have no tangible assets beyond a few lines of clever code." He stood up, the ultimate gesture of dismissal. The meeting was over. "Your startup, Mr. Henderson, is a failure. It was a failure the moment you decided to compete in a world you don't understand." He walked to the window, his back to us. "My advice? Dissolve it. Sell the code for pennies on the dollar to someone who can actually use it. Get a real job. You're a smart kid. Don't waste your life chasing ghosts." The air left my lungs. 3 years. My life savings. Liam's student debt. The trust of our small, dedicated team of 4. All of it. Dismissed in less than 30 seconds. I felt a hot surge of anger mixed with a cold wave of despair. I wanted to scream, to argue, to throw his condescending words back in his face. But I couldn't. He held all the power, and my voice was trapped somewhere in my throat. Liam tugged at my sleeve, a silent plea to just leave with what little dignity we had left. We walked out of that office in a daze. The elevator ride down the 50 floors felt like a descent into the underworld. The lobby, all marble and glass, seemed to mock our shabby, defeated appearances. We stepped out into the rain, a miserable gray drizzle that matched my mood perfectly. We didn't speak. What was there to say? He was right. We were out of money. We were out of options. We had failed. "I'm going to head home," Liam said, his voice hollow. He couldn't even look at me. I just need to think." He clapped a hand on my shoulder, a weak, fleeting gesture of solidarity, before turning and disappearing into the crowd of umbrellas. I couldn't go home. I couldn't face our tiny, cramped office that we used as a live workspace. I couldn't face the hopeful faces of our 2 junior coders. So I did the only thing I could think of. I walked into the dark, quiet bar across the street from Vance's gleaming corporate tower. I took a seat at a booth by the window, ordered a whiskey I couldn't afford, and just stared at the building that housed the man who had just crushed my world. I sat there for an hour, maybe 2, nursing that single drink, the ice melting into a watery grave of my ambitions. The rain streaked down the glass, blurring the city lights into a watercolor of failure. My phone buzzed. It was Liam. "Hey man, just got home, feeling wrecked. Let's talk tomorrow." I typed back a quick, "Okay," and slumped back into the booth. At least I had my friend. We'd figure something out. We always did. That's when I saw it. Through the rain-streaked window, across the street, a black town car pulled up to the curb in front of Vance's building. The doorman rushed out with an umbrella. A figure emerged from the passenger side, hunched against the rain. As he stepped into the golden light of the lobby, he straightened up, shaking the water from his coat. My stomach twisted into a knot of ice. It was Liam. He checked his phone, then looked up at the tower. A moment later, Arthur Vance himself walked into the lobby. He wasn't smiling with pity anymore. He was smiling with satisfaction. He extended a hand, and my best friend, my co-founder, the man who had just told me he was at home feeling wrecked, took it. And in that moment, as they shook hands, I understood. I hadn't just been rejected. I had been betrayed. The whiskey glass nearly slipped from my numb fingers. My breath fogged up the cold window pane as I stared, unblinking, trying to make sense of the impossible scene playing out across the street. Liam and Vance, my partner and my executioner, shaking hands like old friends sealing a deal. The initial shock was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air out of my lungs. It was followed by a white-hot surge of rage that burned away the cold despair. This wasn't a failure. This was a demolition, a controlled demolition, and my best friend was holding the detonator. I threw a few crumpled bills on the table, not even bothering to see if it was enough, and pushed myself out of the booth. My legs felt unsteady, like I was learning to walk again. As I stumbled out into the rain, the black town car pulled away from the curb, its red taillights disappearing into the glittering chaos of the city. I was alone on the sidewalk, the cold rain soaking my hair and jacket, but I barely felt it. My mind was a frantic slideshow of the last 3 years. Every late-night coding session, every shared pizza, every moment of hope and frustration. Had it all been a lie? Every encouraging word from Liam, every pat on the back. Was it all part of this elaborate play? I started walking, my feet moving on autopilot towards our office. I needed to see it. I needed to stand in the space we built together and see if it still felt real. Each step was punctuated by a memory. Liam convincing me to drop out of my master's program to go all in on Nexus AI. "We can do this, Alex," he'd said, his eyes shining with genuine excitement. Or so I had thought. Liam arguing with me to take the meeting with Vance, even after we'd had lukewarm responses from other VCs. This guy's a kingmaker, man. We just need one yes. He had pushed for this meeting. He had pushed me into the lion's den. The office was dark when I arrived. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. The small space smelled of stale coffee and takeout boxes. The two massive whiteboards that dominated one wall were covered in our frantic scrawls. Algorithms, flowcharts, user acquisition strategies, our entire dream mapped out in erasable ink. It looked like a crime scene. I walked over to Liam's desk. It was neat, as always. His laptop was closed, his second monitor dark. For a second, I hesitated. This was his space, his privacy. But privacy died on that sidewalk an hour ago. I sat in his chair and powered on his machine. I knew his password. It was the name of his childhood dog. We were that close. Or so I thought. The desktop loaded, a picture of him and his sister smiling on a beach. A fresh wave of nausea hit me. I started clicking, aimlessly at first. His emails, his documents, his browser history, nothing. It was all clean, professional, too clean. There were no panic searches for jobs, no desperate emails to other potential contacts. It was the digital footprint of a man who knew exactly what his future held. My own laptop was on my desk across the room. An idea, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my anger. If Liam was feeding information to Vance, he wouldn't do it over a traceable email. He was too smart for that. But our system... Nexus AI was built on a proprietary network, a closed loop we designed for ultimate security. But what if the breach wasn't from the outside? What if it was coming from within? I booted up my machine and accessed the server's administrative panel. It was my baby, the part of the code I had personally written, line by line. I started running deep-level diagnostics, a full system integrity check that I hadn't run in months. The progress bar crawled across the screen, each percentage point an eternity. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was either about to confirm my own paranoia or discover that I'd just irrevocably destroyed my friendship over a misunderstanding. Please. I prayed to a God I didn't believe in. Let me be paranoid. The diagnostic finished. A single red flag. One line of code in a report 1,000 pages long. Anomalous data packet rerouting via encrypted outbound port 77B. My blood ran cold. Port 77B wasn't one of our designated ports. It was a ghost, a backdoor. I traced the routing history. Small packets, almost undetectably small, had been streaming out once a day, every day for the last 6 months. 6 months. The betrayal wasn't recent. It was foundational. I worked feverishly, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I needed to know where the data was going. I cross-referenced the destination IP against every public database I could find. It was registered to a shell corporation called Viridian Holdings. It sounded anonymous, meaningless, but a name like that is designed to be meaningless. On a hunch, I typed Viridian Holdings and Arthur Vance into a search engine. The third result was a press release from 2 years ago, announcing Vance Capital's acquisition of a small data analytics firm through its subsidiary, Viridian Holdings. I felt like I couldn't breathe. He had been stealing from us for half a year. Every update, every line of new code, every piece of proprietary research. Liam had been funneling the lifeblood of our company directly to the man who would later declare it a failure. The sheer calculated cruelty of it was staggering. Then I remembered something. A shared network drive we used for long-term storage, for old versions and archived ideas. We barely used it anymore. But as I scanned the file directory, I saw a folder I didn't recognize. Its name was a single cryptic character, a period. It was designed to be overlooked, hidden in plain sight. My cursor hovered over it. I clicked. It was password protected. My mind raced. What would he use? Not his dog's name, that was too obvious. It had to be something he thought I would never guess. Something that meant something only to him. I tried his birthday. Denied. His mother's maiden name. Denied. I sat back, thinking. What was this whole thing about for him? It was about escaping, about a golden parachute. It was his plan B. And then it hit me. A a stupid joke from years ago when we were first sketching Nexus AI on a napkin. I had asked him what we'd call the escape pod if the whole thing blew up. He'd laughed and said, the Albatross. It was the name of his first failed project in college, a symbol of his fear. I typed it in, ALBATROSS. The folder opened. Inside were 3 files. A wire transfer receipt for $50,000 from Viridian Holdings to Liam's personal account, dated 6 months ago. A signed employment contract offering Liam a senior strategist position at Vance Capital, contingent on the successful acquisition of Nexus AI's intellectual property. And the third file, a PDF titled Project Chimera, Asset Integration Proposal. I clicked it open. It was a step-by-step playbook for the hostile takeover of our company. It detailed the strategy of financial strangulation, the psychological demoralization of the founder, me, and the final acquisition of all assets for pennies on the dollar after we were forced to declare bankruptcy. But as I scrolled to the final page, past the soulless corporate jargon, I saw the organizational chart for the post-acquisition team. Arthur Vance's name was there, but he wasn't at the top. He was listed under Project Lead. The name listed above his, under Executive Oversight, was a man I knew all too well. It was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Omni Logistics, our largest, most ruthless competitor, and the one man in the industry I had publicly sworn Nexus AI would put out of business. The name on the screen seemed to burn itself into my retinas. Marcus Thorne, Omni Logistics. It wasn't just a betrayal by a friend and a rejection by an investor. This was an assassination orchestrated by my biggest rival. My entire world tilted on its axis. The past 3 years weren't a story of a struggling startup. They were the story of a lamb being fattened for slaughter. Thorne hadn't just wanted to beat me in the marketplace. He wanted to own my creation, to dismantle my life's work and sell it for parts, all while I was forced to watch. The rage that had been simmering inside me boiled over, transforming into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. The grief was still there, a hollow ache in my chest for the friendship I had lost, but it was now packed in ice. There was no room for sorrow. There was only room for vengeance. I looked around our small, cluttered office, the whiteboards covered in our shared dreams, the empty pizza boxes from 1,000 late nights. They weren't just monuments to a failed venture anymore. They were evidence. They were my arsenal. I spent the next 48 hours in a fugue state, fueled by black coffee and the purest adrenaline I'd ever known. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just worked. I copied every file from Liam's hidden folder onto an encrypted drive. I meticulously documented the data trail from our servers to Viridian Holdings, creating a log so detailed and undeniable it could be presented in a court of law. I delved into the code Liam had been funneling to Vance and Thorne, and that's when I discovered the true, horrifying genius of his betrayal. He hadn't been sending them our complete, up-to-date algorithm. He was too clever for that. He had been sending them a slightly older, slightly flawed version. It was a brilliant move. The code was good enough for Thorne's team to see its immense potential, good enough to convince them to invest time and resources into integrating it. But it contained a fatal flaw, a subtle miscalculation in the predictive modeling that I had identified and fixed about 4 months ago. On a small scale, it was unnoticeable. But if they tried to roll it out across Omni Logistics' massive global network, it would be catastrophic. It would create a cascading failure, a logistical nightmare of phantom shortages and misrouted shipments that would cost them not millions, but billions. Liam had built them a Trojan horse. For a wild, dizzying moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was his plan all along. A double cross? Maybe he was playing the long game, planning to expose Thorne and Vance from the inside? The thought evaporated as quickly as it came. The $50,000 wire transfer and the signed employment contract told a different story. This wasn't a double cross. It was an insurance policy. Liam had given them a faulty product so that when it inevitably failed, they would have no choice but to hire him, the only man who knew how to fix it, for an exorbitant price. He wasn't just selling our company. He was creating his own golden ticket crisis. Armed with this knowledge, a new plan began to form in my mind. It was audacious, reckless, and quite possibly insane. But Vance's words echoed in my head. Dissolve it. Sell the code for pennies on the dollar. He thought I was beaten. He, Thorne, and Liam all thought I was a naive kid who would crawl away and lick his wounds. They had underestimated me, and they had left me with one thing they never should have: the real, perfected Nexus AI algorithm. I went home, showered for the first time in 2 days, and put on the only decent suit I owned. I looked at myself in the mirror. The face staring back was hollowed out, eyes burning with a sleepless fire. I didn't look like a founder anymore. I looked like a soldier heading into battle. My first call was to my aunt. She wasn't rich, not by Vance's standards, but my uncle, before he passed, had been a careful and successful man. He'd started a small manufacturing business and sold it for a fortune in the late 90s, leaving her with a portfolio that she rarely touched. She had always been my biggest supporter, the one who believed in my wild ideas when no one else did. I laid it all out for her: the betrayal, the corporate espionage, the flawed code. I didn't ask her for a handout. I presented it as an investment, a high-risk, high-reward opportunity. Thorne thinks he's buying a racehorse, I told her, my voice raw with conviction. But he's bought a time bomb, and I have the only one in the world that actually works. She was silent for a long time on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting in her quiet, sun-filled living room. "Alex," she finally said, her voice steady, "your uncle always said the best time to buy is when there's blood in the streets. How much do you need?" The number I gave her made her gasp, but she didn't waver. Within an hour, the wire transfer was complete. The second step was harder. I needed a shark, a lawyer who swam in the darkest, most predatory waters of corporate law. I found her on the third try. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and her reputation was legendary. She didn't just win cases. She eviscerated her opponents, leaving their corporate husks smoldering. I paid her exorbitant retainer with my aunt's money and spent the next 3 hours laying out my evidence. She listened without expression, her eyes dissecting every word, every document. When I was finished, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. "It's a beautiful case," she said, a faint predatory smile playing on her lips. "Breach of fiduciary duty, intellectual property theft, conspiracy, wire fraud. It's a symphony of corporate malfeasance. We can sue them into oblivion." "I don't want to sue them," I said quietly. Evelyn raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm sorry?" "Suing takes years. They'll bury us in paperwork and appeals. By the time it's over, Nexus AI will be a footnote. I don't want their money. I want their fear." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "I want to arrange a meeting. Not with Thorne. Not yet. I want to meet with Arthur Vance. And I want to do it tomorrow." Evelyn studied me for a long moment, a flicker of something, amusement, respect, in her cool gaze. "Mr. Henderson," she said slowly, "what exactly are you planning?" I smiled, but it was a cold, sharp thing, utterly devoid of humor. "Mr. Vance advised me to get a real job. I think I'm just going to follow his advice. I'm going into the acquisitions business." The next day, I walked back into the Vance Capitol building. The receptionist's eyes widened in surprise when she saw me. I didn't look like the broken kid who had shuffled out of here 3 days ago. I was calm, composed, my cheap suit feeling like armor. "Alex Henderson for Arthur Vance," I said, my voice even. "He's expecting me." She stammered for a moment before making the call. A few minutes later, I was being escorted back up to the penthouse office with the shipwreck painting. Vance was standing by the window, a smug, self-satisfied look on his face. He probably thought I was here to beg. "Henderson," he said, not bothering to turn around. "I hope you're not here to waste more of my time. I gave you my advice. Take it." "I am taking it," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the vast room. I walked over and placed a thin, leather-bound folder on the edge of his mahogany desk. "I'm here on a business proposition." He turned, an amused smirk on his face. "Oh, and what business is that?" I let the silence hang in the air for a beat, enjoying the flicker of confusion in his eyes. I looked from him to the folder and then back to his face. "I'm here," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor, "to discuss the terms under which you'll be selling me this firm." Arthur Vance stared at me for a full 10 seconds, his face a perfect mask of bewildered amusement. Then he let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. It wasn't a sound of genuine humor. It was the sound a predator makes when a mouse tries to bite back. It was dismissive, insulting, and exactly what I expected. "Selling you my firm?" he repeated, walking slowly from the window to his desk, his eyes never leaving mine. He circled the chair I had sat in just days before, a lion inspecting its territory. "Son, I admire the audacity, I really do. But let's be realistic. You couldn't afford the painting on that wall, let alone the company that bought it. What did you do? Hit the lottery? Find a rich uncle?" "Something like that," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, meeting his condescending gaze with a stillness that seemed to unnerve him. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. It was subtle, but it was there. I was no longer the desperate founder begging for scraps. I was something else, something he couldn't yet categorize. "Look, Henderson," he sighed, the act of the patient mentor wearing thin. He sat down behind his desk, creating the familiar barrier between us. "This is pathetic. Whatever game you're playing, it's over. Nexus AI is dead. It's only a matter of time before you're in bankruptcy. You have nothing." "That's where you're wrong, Arthur," I said, using his first name for the first time. The mask of politeness was gone. His eyes narrowed slightly. "I have everything. And you," I nodded at the leather-bound folder on his desk, "are about to find out just how little you have." He glanced down at the folder with disdain, then back up at me. "And what's in here? Your new and improved fantasy projections? A business plan written in crayon?" "Evidence," I said simply. "Open it." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, I knew I had him. The bravado was a front. He was curious. He was worried. With a theatrical sigh, he reached out and flipped open the folder. Inside, on top, was a single crisp sheet of paper. It was the wire transfer receipt from Viridian Holdings to Liam Scott's personal bank account. Vance's face didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. He was good, I'll give him that. He turned to the next page. It was a copy of Liam's signed employment contract with Vance Capital, the one contingent on the successful acquisition of my company's IP. His face was still a mask, but the color was starting to drain from it. He knew what he was looking at. He just didn't know how I had it. "This is circumstantial," he finally said, his voice a low growl. "A disgruntled employee, it proves nothing." "Keep reading," I urged. He flipped the page. This time, it was a series of technical documents, server logs, IP traces, data packet analysis, the undeniable digital trail that led directly from my server to his subsidiary. I had printed it all out, a mountain of damning data condensed into a dozen, easy-to-read pages with the most incriminating sections highlighted in yellow. I watched the blood drain completely from his face. He was no longer looking at the desperate founder of a failed startup. He was looking at the architect of his own ruin. "And now for the grand finale," I said softly. He turned to the final document in the folder. It was a printout of the Project Chimera PDF, his own internal playbook for my destruction. And there, on the last page, was the organizational chart, his name, Marcus Thorne's name, Omni Logistics, the whole sordid conspiracy laid bare on his own desk. He slammed the folder shut. The sound echoed in the silent office. "What do you want?" he hissed, the pretense of civility gone. His eyes were no longer condescending. They were filled with a venomous hatred. "I told you," I replied, my voice steady. "I want your firm." He laughed again, but this time it was a ragged, desperate sound. "You're insane. Even with this garbage. You think you can touch me? You think Thorne won't crush you like a bug? We'll bury you in litigation. We'll ruin you. You'll be a pariah in this industry." "You could try," I said, taking a step closer to the desk, "and maybe you'd win. In 5 years. After millions in legal fees. After this folder gets anonymously leaked to every major news outlet and the SEC. After your investors pull their money and your reputation is nothing but toxic sludge. After Marcus Thorne cuts you loose and leaves you to take the fall, which we both know he will. He's a shark, Arthur. And you're just the pilot fish who led him to the meal. What do you think he does with pilot fish when he's done with them?" Every word was a hammer blow, and I could see them landing. I saw the flash of fear in his eyes as I mentioned Thorne. He knew I was right. To a man like Thorne, Vance was completely expendable. "So here's my offer," I continued, leaning my hands on the polished mahogany, invading his space. "It's a very simple one. You're going to sell me Vance Capital, not for cash. I don't have that kind of money yet. You're going to trade it to me, all of it, in exchange for 2 things. He stared at me, his mouth a thin, hard line. "Go on." "First, this folder." I tapped it with my finger. "And every copy of the data I have. It all disappears. You walk away clean. Second," I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. "I'm going to give you something far more valuable. I'm going to give you the key to destroying Marcus Thorne." His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and dawning avarice. "What are you talking about?" "The Nexus AI code Liam gave you? The code you passed on to Omnilogistics? It's poison," I explained, a grim smile on my face. "It's a Trojan horse with a fatal flaw. When Thorne integrates it into his system, it's not going to make him billions. It's going to bankrupt him. And I am the only person on this planet with a version that actually works. You give me this firm, and I give you the real code. You take that to Thorne. Play the hero who discovered the flaw and fixed it. You'll save his company, and in return, you'll get whatever you want from him. A seat on his board, a bigger piece of the pie, his eternal gratitude. You'll be bigger than ever." He was speechless, his mind clearly racing, processing the sheer diabolical beauty of the plan. He was a snake, and I had just offered him a bigger, more venomous set of fangs. I was offering him a way out that didn't just save him, it made him stronger. It was an offer a man like Arthur Vance couldn't possibly refuse. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze distant. Finally, he looked at me, a new, terrifying light in his eyes. It was the look of a predator who has found a new partner in the hunt. "My lawyers will need to draw up the papers," he said, his voice raspy. "My lawyer is already on it," I replied, pulling a business card from my pocket and sliding it across the desk. "Evelyn Reed. I'm sure you've heard of her. She'll be in touch." I turned and walked towards the door, the deal done. My heart was pounding, a wild drumbeat of victory and adrenaline. I had done it. I had faced the dragon in its lair and walked out with its horde. As I reached for the door handle, Vance's voice cut through the silence. "Henderson," he said. I stopped, but didn't turn around. "One question. This faulty code, this Trojan horse you mentioned, what happens if I just let Thorne implement it? Let him crash and burn?" I stood there for a moment, my back to him, the cold brass of the handle under my palm. A slow, chilling realization washed over me. I had been so focused on my own game of chess, I hadn't considered his. I thought I was offering him a weapon to use against Thorne, but he saw another path. Why be Thorne's savior when he could be his successor? I turned around slowly. The smug, amused look was back on his face, but it was different now. It was darker, more dangerous. He was leaning back in his chair, the picture of control. Letting him fail is certainly an option, I conceded, my mind racing. Omni Logistics would be vulnerable, a perfect target for a hostile takeover if one had the resources. Indeed, Vance said, a predatory gleam in his eyes. And one would need to know exactly when. The system would fail to time the market perfectly. One would need the man who designed the flaw in the first place. He smiled, a thin, cruel slash. Tell me, Henderson, what are you doing for dinner tonight? I think it's time you met your new partner. The air in the room went from cold to Arctic. Vance wasn't just accepting my deal, he was trying to hijack it. He saw the endgame I had laid out, the destruction of Marcus Thorne, and he wanted to be the one holding the axe, with me as his willing accomplice. He thought he had me cornered. He thought that because I had the audacity to come after him, I was just like him, a creature of pure transactional greed. For the second time in his office, he had completely, catastrophically underestimated me. I let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. It wasn't the grim, vengeful smile from before. This one was genuine. That's a very generous offer, Arthur, I said, walking back toward his desk. But I think there's been a slight misunderstanding. His brow furrowed. Oh? You seem to be under the impression that you're still in a position to negotiate. You're not. You see, the deal I offered you a few minutes ago, it was a courtesy, a one-time only offer to let you walk away with your skin intact. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small, sleek object, placing it on the desk between us. It was a digital voice recorder, its small red light blinking steadily. It had been blinking since the moment I walked into his office. Everything we've discussed for the past 20 minutes, I said conversationally, including your enthusiastic interest in conspiring to commit massive-scale corporate sabotage against a publicly traded company, has been recorded. Evelyn Reed is a very thorough lawyer. She insisted. The color, which had just begun to return to Vance's face, vanished in an instant. He looked like he'd been turned to stone. His eyes darted from the recorder to my face, raw panic finally breaking through his ironclad composure. He had thought he was a player in a new game. Now he realized he was just a pawn in mine, and he had just willingly confessed to a litany of felonies that would not just end his career, but land him in a federal prison. You, he whispered, the word choked with a mixture of awe and pure hatred. Me, I confirmed. So, let's go back to the original offer, shall we? You're going to sign your company over to me, not as a partner, not as a co-conspirator. You're going to sign it over, and then you're going to disappear. You'll retire, move to a private island. I don't care. But your life in this world is over. The papers will be on your desk in the morning. Sign them, or this recording goes straight to the U.S. Attorney's Office. Are we clear? He didn't answer. He just stared at the blinking red light as if it were the eye of God. I picked up the recorder, slipped it back into my pocket, and turned for the door. This time, I didn't stop. The next 24 hours were a blur of legal maneuvers. Evelyn Reed, true to her reputation, was a force of nature. By noon the next day, a shell company I now controlled was the sole owner of Vance Capital. Arthur Vance was gone, vanished from the corporate world as if he'd never existed. I stood in his office, my office, staring out the panoramic window at the city. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was a heavy, profound sense of finality. The war was over, but the cost had been immense. I sat down behind the massive mahogany desk. It didn't feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a command center. My first call was not to Marcus Thorne. It was to Liam. He picked up on the second ring, his voice wary. "Alex, what's going on? I heard rumors." "They're true, Liam," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Vance is out. I'm in." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the frantic recalculations. "How?" he finally stammered. "What did you do?" "I did what you should have done," I replied. "I fought back. Your employment contract with Vance Capital is void, by the way. So is your $50,000 signing bonus. I suggest you find a very good lawyer because Omni Logistics is going to be looking for someone to blame when their new system crashes and burns. And right now, that someone is you. I could hear his panicked breathing. Alex, wait, you don't understand. Oh, I understand perfectly, I cut him off, the ice in my voice sharp enough to cut glass. I understand that you sold me out. You sold our dream out for a paycheck. You were my brother, Liam. I would have taken a bullet for you, and you stabbed me in the back for a corner office. I paused, letting the words hang in the dead air between us. Enjoy your money. I hope it was worth it. I hung up before he could reply. I never spoke to him again. My next call was to Marcus Thorne. His assistant was dismissive until I told her I was the new CEO of Vance Capital. That got me through immediately. Mr. Henderson. Thorne's voice was a low, rumbling purr, laced with suspicion. An unexpected development. I was under the impression Arthur was handling the Nexus AI acquisition. Arthur has retired, I said calmly, and the terms of the acquisition have changed. Nexus AI is no longer for sale. In fact, it's now the sole asset of a new, extremely well-funded R&D firm. I leaned back in the ridiculously expensive chair. A firm which has just filed a series of patents that make the code you currently possess obsolete, not to mention legally radioactive. There was a dangerous silence on the line. Is that a threat, Mr. Henderson? It's a reality, Mr. Thorne. The version of my algorithm you have is a flawed beta version, a ticking time bomb. But I'd be willing to license you the real thing, the perfected version, for a price, of course. The price I named was astronomical. It was 10 times what Vance had likely valued my entire company at. It was a number designed to be an insult. Thorne was silent for a moment. Then, to my surprise, he chuckled. It was a dry, humorless sound. You have guts, Henderson. I'll give you that. You leveraged my own conspiracy to take over my puppet firm and are now trying to sell me back the technology I tried to steal. It's poetic. He paused. Send me the term sheet. My technical team will verify your claims. If your code is as good as you say it is, you'll have your money. And just like that, it was done. 3 days ago, I was a failure. Today, I was the CEO of my own venture capital firm, with my first major licensing deal about to close for a 9-figure sum. I walked out of the office and didn't look back at the shipwreck painting. I took the elevator down, not to the dark bar across the street, but to the lobby where I found my small team, my real team, waiting for me. The 2 junior coders who had stuck with me through everything, their faces etched with worry and confusion. I looked at their hopeful, anxious expressions. Pack your things, I said, a real smile finally reaching my eyes. We're moving, and nobody is ever eating ramen for dinner again, unless they want to. We didn't just survive, we thrived. Nexus AI became the industry standard, and my new firm, built from the ashes of Vance Capital, became a launchpad for dozens of other founders with brilliant ideas and no one to believe in them. I never became a man like Vance or Thorne. I never let the bitterness of Liam's betrayal corrupt me. Because in the end, they taught me the most valuable lesson of all. A startup isn't just about a clever algorithm or a slick pitch deck. It's about resilience. It's about staring into the abyss of failure and betrayal and having the courage to not just walk away, but to turn around and offer to buy the whole damn thing with cash.